All right. Hey, everybody. This is Anand from CB Insights. We're going to get started. We have a lot of material to cover, and so we want to get started on time. Um, so, uh, Again, my name is Anand. I'm one of the co-founders of CB Insights. I'm really happy to be hosting this today with Acton Software. We're going to jump into the content pretty quickly. First, a couple of administrative things before we do that. Um, so in terms of just a little bit about us, CB Insights, hopefully some of you know us. We recently launched a product called CB Insights for Sales to help B2B sales teams find their next customer. And I'm happy to be co-hosting today with Janelle Johnson from Acton Software. Acton has a really great marketing automation platform that really kind of does things cradle to grave for marketing and sales teams. So Janelle is pretty kind of has a very varied skill set. So she's done everything from email marketing to webinars to lead gen to lead nurturing. So she kind of is a wealth of information about these topics. And so she'll get into some of the best practices around lead nurturing. So in terms of sort of just administrative, this recording will be distributed immediately after the presentation, the recording as well as the presentation, so don't worry about that. If you have questions during the course of the presentation, need support, there's a link there to the Citrix site that you can get support at. For questions, we are going to try to take some maybe throughout the presentation, but probably at the end mostly. So if you have questions, please use the questions tab and ask there. You can also ask via social media. If you hear something interesting or see some data points that you'd like to share, these are our Twitter handles, or you can use the hashtag startup sales. You can also ask questions there, and we have folks monitoring that to pick up your questions from there. So hopefully we'll get to most of them. If we can't get to all the questions, we will try to see if we can answer them after the fact and circulate answers after the webinar concludes. So with that, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a pretty packed schedule. We're going to start with kind of why to sell to startups. For those of you who are here, I imagine you're convinced of the value, but just in case, we're going to kind of just share some data about why they are a compelling opportunity. We are going to then jump into some of our assumptions about the folks on the webinar to make sure that you're in the right place, and then talk a little bit about the sales funnel. From there, we'll talk more about kind of how do you identify the right startups. There's a lot of what we call data janitor work that folks waste time on. And we're going to hopefully find and identify some ways for you to maybe minimize that. Then we'll get into pretty detailed talk around lead nurturing and kind of how to do that well. And then finally, we'll kind of conclude with why most cold emails really suck badly and how you can improve them. So, the goal really is hopefully this will be pretty engaging, and hopefully you'll leave with some actionable things that you can take away to improve your sales processes to startups. So why sell to startups? Few things here, and hopefully most of you are convinced of this, but just to kind of highlight, today's startups are tomorrow's giant corporations, right? You look back and Facebook wasn't even around 15 years ago. You look back and see it, Google. So these fast-growing tech, life sciences, energy companies are kind of ascendant and are increasingly kind of putting existing incumbents on notice. And the benefit of getting in early with tomorrow's giant corporations today is that there's a faster sales cycle, flatter structures. You're usually talking to somebody, co-founder, CEO, or pretty senior very early in the process. You get there early, you get to grow alongside them, as mentioned. And then the other big thing is that you're not necessarily battling with incumbents at startups. They don't have existing solutions that you have to rip out. You can actually become that solution that becomes sort of foundational to their growth. So that's some of the benefits. The other big benefit is there's a lot of money with startups, right? So this is the old famous quote by Willie Sutton, the bank robber, and where he said, "I rob banks because that's where the money is." And there is certainly a lot of that in startup land right now. In just the last quarter, so we're looking at July through September of 2015, almost $38 billion went into 1,799 deals, and these were just VC-backed companies. So this is not companies that had raised money from private equity or that had raised money from angel investors. So this is not even the full sample. So pretty massive amounts of capital. What you see on the next page is kind of the trend over time. In the first 3 quarters of this year, we've already eclipsed the record of 2014 with almost $100 billion, and we still have a quarter to go. We're 2x over what there was in 2013. So lots of money in startup land within North America, which is the biggest market. Almost 60 billion in the first 3 quarters. Again, already more than 2014, all of 2014. Asia and Europe are also growing really fast as well. One of the big changes, I think, has been the growth in early stage deal sizes. So traditionally, I'd say a lot of B2B sales teams would say, hey, we're not that interested in the seed angel Series A companies because they raised a $500,000 or $1 million round. Because of the amount of money now available, there's actually, even the earliest stage fundings are quite large. At the median in Q3 was 2.5 million. So with that kind of initial funding, they actually have pretty significant buying power pretty early in their maturity. And then, of course, at the later stages, there's immense amounts of money right now. So in Q3 of 2015, $35 million was the median round. And so obviously, a company that's growing that fast and raising that much money has lots of needs for products and services, and obviously the financial wherewithal to make those purchases. The other big sort of recent phenomena is what folks kind of call the private IPO. So companies are staying private longer and longer. And so, back in 2000, a lot of these companies probably would have gone public, but they don't need to today. And so they raise what folks kind of dubbed the private IPO, which is these $100 million rounds of funding. Traditionally, a $100 million round of funding would have been an IPO. It's sort of the average size of an IPO. But now people are doing it, within the private markets. And here you see the growth in those really large financing rounds. So very mature companies staying private longer are another kind of compelling reason to target the startup community. And then for those of you who are versed in the startup world, the unicorn club. So unicorn is sort of this ridiculous term that has been coined that describes private companies worth over $1 billion. And you see in Q2 and Q3 of this year, there were 23 new companies added to that club. So, a lot of companies kind of that are reaching sort of pretty massive scale in the private markets. When you look at some of the largest financings here, you get a sense, just the 12 largest funding rounds in the US last quarter were almost $6 billion. And the smallest one on this map is a $200 million round, right? And obviously Silicon Valley is well represented, but you also see kind of the diffusion of investments across the country, from the Northeast all the way down. So that's kind of why you should sell to startups. Hopefully, for those of you who are on here, you're already convinced of that, but we thought it was important to give you that context. So now we're going to talk about optimizing the funnel. So going from prospecting, nurturing to closing. Our goals really here are to get folks to do less what we call data janitor work, and we'll explain what that is. And with that, or if you do that, we think the outcome of that is you'll have better relationships and you'll build better relationships with prospects, and ultimately that will translate into more sales. So our assumptions kind of about who you all are. One, most obviously, you work in sales, business development, marketing, or sales ops. You're selling a product or service that's at least 10K per annum. So we're looking at sort of high value sales. If you have a transactional sale where you can call somebody up and get their credit card in one call, these strategies may not be appropriate for that. These are really strategies more focused on consultative sales. We're assuming you use email outreach in your outreach efforts. If you don't, you should be. It's a great weapon that you should have in your arsenal. We're also assuming you're willing to do some work to make yourself successful. By the fact that you're on this webinar, that's probably an indication. And then lastly, that your underlying product or service is actually great. So, the best sales strategies can't overcome a terrible product. So, we're going to go through the sales funnel. I won't spend much time on here, but, how do you prioritize? How do you target? And then ultimately, how do you nurture leads? So with that, we're going to talk about finding startups, so the prospecting piece. So the reality here is we talk to lots of B2B sales teams. Most of them waste insane amounts of time pitching the same startups, and they do it too late. So we need to stop you guys doing that. And the way they do it is what I'm going to show you here. And this is kind of a case study using us. We raised a financing round at the end of August. We got TechCrunch coverage, New York Times, Pando, etc. And so what ended up happening as a result of that was the email started pouring in, right? So there was sort of blood in the water, and every B2B salesperson that saw one of those articles put us in to some database or some Excel spreadsheet and started dialing for dollars or emailing for dollars. And the challenge for you as a business development professional is that everybody's reading the same sources. And so while they're all great sources of information, there's really no informational advantage, right? So 147 emails in 2 weeks is a lot. That's pretty overwhelming for anybody. And then even worse, and we'll get back to this later, most of those emails really sucked, right? So 138 out of 147 emails were, excuse my French on this page, were not very good. And so that's a problem, right? So not only is everybody pitching the same set of clients, they're also not doing it in a very compelling way. And we'll walk through kind of how do you fix that at the end with some kind of actionable templates that you can use to send better emails. There's a great study done that said that 50% of sales time is wasted on unproductive prospecting, and sort of what happened to us, I think, is symptomatic and emblematic of that. And most of the time spent on prospecting is not used efficiently, and a lot of time is wasted doing that inefficient prospecting. So what we want to do is find you more prospects earlier and quicker, and then get more to close. So this is, I won't go into all the math here, but very crudely, sort of, let's take a base case. So let's say this is where you are at today. You have 1,000 prospects, 2% agree to an initial conversation. Of those 20 conversations, 20% get to proposal, 50% of those proposals turn into a client, and as a result, you get 20K of business, assuming a revenue per customer of 10K. So, the question is, well, how do you get that to 30K? Let's just go modest kind of increase. You can change two levers here. You could try to get 1,500 prospects. So couldn't you get 50% more prospects? That sounds like quite a bit, especially if you're doing this kind of in a very manual way. But if you can get to 1,500 prospects, assuming nothing else changes, you'll get to 30K. The other thing you can do is, how do you get more to take that initial conversation? So let's say you go to 1,000 prospects, but instead of 2% going to the first convo, you go to 3%. Again, you get to 30K. Our goal really with what we're going to show you today is, how do you do both, right? How do we get you to 1,500 prospects and help you get to more initial conversations? And the result of that is 125% increase in revenue. So this is a very simple example, but I think it highlights just changing, moving the needle a little bit on some of these things can have massive impacts from a bottom line perspective. And for folks who are in sales, that ultimately translates into your own kind of paychecks as well. So a big part of this is going to be driven by your appetite for automation, right? And so there's a sort of spectrum of automation, and I think most of the folks who sell to startups are kind of on the skateboard, right? And this is, they're reading tech blogs, biz journals, they're subscribing to newsletters, they see something and they start emailing and calling folks. And the reality of that is that the time it takes to do that is extremely high. The cost from a pure dollars perspective is low. If you put a value on your time, the cost is actually quite high. And then the quality of conversation tends to be fairly low because you're optimizing for volume. You're not optimizing for the quality of the outreach. So you're spending so much time gathering your prospects that you don't have time to do research on all of them and hence have good conversations. In the middle, you kind of got, if your bicycle, right, you can use some hacks and free online tools to maybe try to piece this together a bit more. The cost, time is still a bit high, maybe not as high as the skateboard. Dollar is still low because you're doing it for free, except if you value your time. The quality of conversation probably goes up a little bit because you're actually learning a little bit more about the company, the companies and the startups. And then finally, kind of, you have the marketing automation using B2B sales intelligence to automate the process. Here, the time decreases significantly. you do have to outlay some expense, but again, if you put a value on your time, it should be, you should, be in the black. And then the quality of conversations as a result is much higher. So that's kind of, your spectrum. Our goal here is to help you kiss fewer frogs, right? So how do you find the right prospects? So depending on the industries and geos that you target, a bunch of companies never make it onto TechCrunch or never make it into those newsletters, right? And so when we look at the data, we see about 30 to 50% of companies, depending on the industry and geographies you're targeting, don't make the mainstream press, right? And those are the companies you want to target because those are the ones that aren't getting 147 emails in 2 weeks. You also want to find companies that are similar to those that you've already closed or that your competitors have closed. So this is one thing that we find that B2B sales teams don't do enough time, spend enough time on is, hey, if I've already closed somebody in this industry, that obviously means our solution works there, our service works there. Why not go find everybody else in that space and convert them as well? Part of the reason folks might not do this is they didn't think to do it. Part of it is also that it's difficult to do. And so again, we'll show you some ways that hopefully you can identify some of those similar companies. And then the third thing is, how do you identify companies with traction before they raise that next round of financing, right? As soon as it hits, it hits the newsletters and the blogs, everybody's calling. So is there a way to try to find those companies a bit earlier before they're getting inundated with all sorts of offers from your competitors and other providers of products and services? So how do you find similar prospects using manual tools, right? So on the bicycle, kind of on that spectrum, what are you going to use here? So the one nice little Google hack that we found to find similar companies is a search where you do related : and then type in the company URL. So here you see Cloudera. So I did related : www.cloudera.com, and you see all the similar companies that have come up. This is not foolproof. So Google is amazing, but they don't do this well for every single um, company, but you'll see it sometimes. The other thing you can do here is on LinkedIn, there's on a company page, there'll be a people also viewed. So I went to Braintree, which is a payments company, and then I saw Stripe, Venmo, Square, which are also other payment companies that are notable. So that's kind of a way to find similar companies using, some free online tools. It does take some time, but it's one way to do that. How do you do it with technology? So these are some screenshots from CB Insights for Sales. You punch in the parameters you want of your ideal target. Hey, I'm looking for companies in Boston that are in mobile that have raised at least $15 million, and I want a feed of those companies over time. So again, the discovery part I think can be automated here in a big way. The other thing is, how do you leverage algorithms to identify new targets? So upload a list of clients that you've closed or your competitors' customers, and we'll tell you who's similar to them that might be relevant. And so again, it's not just a one-time thing, it's then on an ongoing basis, keep pushing those under the radar companies to you. So all that data janitor work, and I think if you add up the amount of time you spend reading the different blogs and trying to get contact data and then get that into your CRM, all of that can be automated. We can push stuff to Salesforce right from here. So this is how you automate some of the identification of under the radar startup companies. For momentum, again, you can do things here that are manual. So there's some tools for web traffic. You can use Alexa, Quantcast, Compete, or SimilarWeb. For hiring activity, if you think of hiring as a signal that indicates quality, there's a bunch of sources here. Social media chatter, you type in the name of a company on Twitter, you can see if they're being talked about, right? It's not great for a biotech company, but for a consumer tech company, that can be actually pretty relevant. You also sometimes can tell sentiment on Twitter. So are people saying good things or bad things about the company? And so that might give you an indication of whether they're a good or bad prospect. You might, in some cases, if you're a PR firm, if people are saying bad things about the company, it might make them a more interesting potential target customer for you. And then finally, news volume. You can look at something like Google News to understand, are people talking about the company? So that's, again, sort of the manual tools that you can use. You can also automate the identification of startups with momentum and then, ultimately figure out the ones that are best fit for your business. So these are, again, things from CB Insights for Sales. You have Sequoia Capital deals. So anytime, Sequoia Capital is, one of the best, 5 VCs. So every time they do a deal, you want to know about that early. You can build a feed for that. You see Snapchat, their hiring activity. So this is their job activity over time. If you can actually look at the types of jobs they're hiring for. So if you sell into the tech organization and you see somebody's hiring DevOps people, maybe that makes them a more interesting target for you. Dropbox, you see below their tech stack. So if there's certain technologies that are useful to know about, you see that here. We do a lot on the predictive analytics side. So we've done some work with the New York Times. You kind of see in the middle 50 future unicorns. So we looked with the New York Times at identifying companies that are going to be the next sort of billion-dollar company. So, how do you understand growth and momentum early before that funding announcement? I think that's the, kind of that old Wayne Gretzky quote of you want to skate to where the puck is going. That's what we're trying to show you here. So that's you did some of those strategies, whether fully automated or semi-automated, you got your prospect list together, and this is where sort of folks say, okay, now I'm going to sort of unleash the email bombs, right? And this is where we want you to just take a step back, right? And kind of not optimized just for volume, right? This is where quality becomes important. So we'll revisit the old analysis, right? Almost 94% of cold emails, B2B cold emails, are terrible, right? And so the problem with these emails is that most of them, the biggest challenge they have is that the subject lines are terrible, right? And so your first challenge, the first gate you have to get past is getting somebody to open your email, and your subject line is the way that happens. And so if they don't open it, even if the body of your email is great, you're dead in the water. The other big thing is there's no clear what's in it for me, right? So a lot of the things that I saw in the 147 that we received was that it was all about the service provider or what they do. And that's not what I'm thinking about, right? I'm thinking about problems that we have with our business. And then finally, the point we've been talking about earlier, the emails got to me too late. There was too much noise. It was hard to separate signal from the noise. I actually went in and saved all those emails because I wanted to actually understand them, but most folks don't do that. They just delete, right? And so even if you have a great, compelling product or service, you're hitting somebody up at really a bad time. So that's one of the big challenges. you know, um, equal opportunity suckage is what you see here. So who are the terrible sales emails from? It wasn't that a certain type of salesperson did this badly. It was really across the board. So everybody from recruiters to software and infrastructure providers to consultants and brokers, it was kind of across the board. We got bad emails from a bunch of different types of folks. So it wasn't that there was any particular group that was kind of more guilty than the others. And so this is one of the things that was probably the most surprising to me when I looked. Most of these folks were selling a pretty high value or important service or product, and 80% of them only sent a single email. So putting aside that email was terrible, it's going to be hard to sell us on something that's a really big decision about, hey, who we're going to use to recruit, or what we're going to use for hosting, or what we're going to use for marketing automation, on a single email. These are big decisions for a startup to make. You need to nurture that relationship over time. And so the idea of doing that with one email is just incredibly lazy, right? And you see that most folks who are not good at emailing stop at a single email, which is a problem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Janelle because I think that's a really important point. And Janelle is going to kind of jump into, how do you nurture prospects really well. So Janelle, turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anand. I think that's a very good point. There's a better way of doing this, and it's not a single email. And it's really recognizing the fact that that your buyers, these prospects that you're talking to, are on a multi-stage journey. They're, they don't know who you are when you send that first email, and they may not understand what you're offering. They may not be aware of the problem. So to start with a couple of stats, first of all, 50% of leads that are qualified are just not ready to buy yet. So they may be, a great lead for you, and they may be somebody that's very worthwhile to talk to, but that doesn't mean that right away they're going to say, yes, absolutely, send me a contract. So you need to be aware of that as you're reaching out to these folks. And the other thing is the companies that excel at lead nurturing generate 50% more sales-ready leads at a 33% lower cost. Now, this is very important because, you know, all of us marketers are always looking for ways of doing more with less. And so the fact that you can get higher number of leads, but while reducing your cost, is going to be very, very relevant for most companies as well. Next slide, please. So when you're building your list and you have your folks that you're talking to, you've identified them, you have your database that you're going after, you want to make sure that you're understanding what their process is, the different stages of the that they're going to take while they're researching. And so what I have laid out here is an example of this. And this is you know, depending on your particular industry, what you're selling, what your sales cycle is like. If it's a really long sales cycle, you may have more than 5 stages. If it's really short and, you know, and more transactional, it may be fewer stages. This is an example of 5 stages. And in stage 1, it's that your buyer has identified an issue or a challenge that they need to solve. They don't know how to solve it. They've just identified that they have a problem. And in stage 2, this is where they're going to start to research different solutions for that problem. What's available? How are other people solving this? What should I even be looking at to help me solve that? In stage 3, they've identified different solutions that are available and different vendors that can provide that solution to them. So now they're starting to look at the companies and the vendors that can help them. And in stage 4, they're identifying the criteria that they need, that they're going to use to make a decision on which vendor to go with. So at this point, it's like, this is how we're going to evaluate vendor A against vendor B. And these are the tools that we're going to use, and here's what's really important to us. In stage 5, they're actually making that decision. So if you think about your buyers going through these different stages, it's very critical to send them different types of content to those various stages, and we'll talk about that in just a minute here. But the goal of Nurture email programs is making sure that you have an automated way to send those emails to folks depending on where they are in their journey and who they are, that encourages them to interact with your brand. It's very focused on the buyer and what their needs are versus coming at it from what is relevant or what is important for you as the marketer or the seller at this moment in time. So nurturing is allowing you to send highly targeted messages by segmenting your database segmenting your database on the information that you already know about somebody. And why is this important? Well, it's going to help us achieve 2 goals. You're going to make sure that you're serving the right content at the right time. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is the right content for the buyer and at the right time for them. So they may not care that it's end of quarter for you and you're trying to close out your number. What they care about is where are they in that 5-step, 5-stage buyer process. Because if they're at stage 1 where they've only started to identify a challenge, they're probably not ready for a percentage off offer at this point in time because they don't even know what the solution is yet. And then it's making sure that you're efficiently moving buyers through each stage of that decision-making process so that you have a cadence of relevant information that's being sent to them. And as you're doing this, it's important to understand that depending on where they are in that buyer process, those stages we talked about, that they're getting content that makes sense for them. So a different view of it, we had a linear stage line. Well, let's look at it in a funnel. Because, you know, stage 1 is very top of funnel. If they're just identifying what the challenge is, they're very top of funnel. And so if you're looking at what types of content work for top of funnel, it's more along, it's lighter content. It's introducing your brand, but it's also introducing the challenges of the industry, videos and white papers on broad trends and challenges that folks are solving with that. As we're moving into the middle of the funnel, they know what the problems are, they know what the solutions are, and you're going to give them very persona-specific content that is so relevant to who they are and what their challenges are, and to really help aid that buying process. And then when they move into bottom of funnel, they're making a decision. They're looking at different vendors. They need to know why you over your competitor. And in order to do this, you're going to provide decision supportive content, maybe ROI calculators, case studies, customer videos, things like that, that's going to help them understand why you're the better choice. So what does this look like? Well, you're going to map out your stages to your personas that you're talking to, and you're going to map your content there. And so this is an example, and it's an example actually from Act-On. So we have different personas. Our most popular one is the marketer. So we have Molly, the marketing machine, and Molly needs to generate more sales-ready leads. That's her challenge. Now, what we've done is we've mapped out along each of those stages that we talked about before, what are the types of content that we have available to us that we can serve up. And you'll notice in stage 1 and stage 2, the content is really aligned around addressing the day-to-day pain points and interests. So as I mentioned before, early funnel, top of funnel stage content, it's what are the challenges and what are some broad ways that people can solve these challenges. As we get farther down into stage 3, 4, and 5, it's really along validating the interest, making sure we're providing product information. What can we, what's the difference between Act-On and other vendors there? Things like analyst reports, the Forrester Wave report, or case studies as we get farther down. These become very critical at those later stages. And what you can do is then create a series of content for each of those stages. And now what this is right here is this is stage 2 content that we're providing. And it's a series of emails that we can send out to folks as they're at that stage. Because remember, it's not just send one email and move on. And wouldn't it be great if everybody after the first email moved to the second stage and progressed very in a linear fashion like that? But the actuality is they're not going to. And so you may need to have multiple touch points in each of those stages to try to build up that engagement over time. Make sure that they become very comfortable and familiar with your brand and that they're interacting. And at that point when they start to show the signs that they're ready that they've moved to the next stage, then you have another set of content available for them. So as they're engaging with your content and they're moving through those stages, you're going to have a variety of leads that are coming through you. And the key here is going to be, how do you prioritize those leads? How do you make sure that the marketing team knows when to pass the leads to the sales team and that your sales team knows who to call first? So one way of doing this is to utilize lead scoring. Lead scoring allows you to basically gives your company an objective way of ranking all of the leads. And it's really made up of 2 components. You have your demographic layer, and this is very comfortable for marketers. We play very heavily and have for many years in the demographic area. Things like, where are they located? How big is the company? What is the person's title? What's the budget? Things like that. That's very comfortable. We have that data. We can append that data. It's easy to get to, and we can start to understand who our prospects are. But the other side of lead scoring and really the lead prioritization is their behavior. Is the user engaged? And what is their level of engagement with your company? And this is really one of the beauties of marketing automation platforms, is they allow you to see basically what we call the digital body language of a prospect as they're working their way through it, as they're engaging with your site. And this can be everything from, have they visited your website? What pages did they visit? Have they downloaded white papers? Maybe they visited your pricing page, and that's I know that from the sales side, it's a very exciting thing when somebody's visiting your pricing page because it's a buy signal. So you can start to look at those types of behaviors and you can put a score against them. And again, it's an objective way to say, here's the highest, or the warmest leads that we have. So what you're doing, again, is making sure that you're tracking that behavior, you're understanding that engagement with your brand, and you're providing that information to the sales organization in order to prioritize those leads based on that lead score. So when you're nurturing leads, it's really important to understand what you should be measuring, because that's part of that's in the world of marketing, right? Everything we do, we need to measure. We need to make sure that we're achieving our goals for it, and that we're figuring out ways of optimizing to get even better results the next quarter. So when you're nurturing, the key things that you should be looking for and measuring are, how many new leads are you getting? And how many of them are marketing qualified leads? What is the cost for that marketing qualified lead, and what could you do to bring it down? When you're running automated programs, it's very critical to understand your open rates and click-through rates of those programs, and where you can get better results by maybe changing a subject line or switching out content to get better response and better engagement for those. And then it's also important to look at how many leads are you getting by lead score. Because if you're getting a lot of leads but they have very low lead scores, they're probably not really sales ready, or maybe you need to look at how you're qualifying those to understand that what you're creating is high quality enough and is really ready to be passed over to the sales team. So okay, what are we doing on another way of looking at marketing measurements is your funnel. And we've touched on a lot of the metrics that matter for nurturing your audience. But at the end of the day, what matters most to every marketer is, how is this affecting my bottom line? How are the leads we are generating progressing through the funnel? And how many are actually converting to revenue? Which is why funnel reporting is a very popular feature for marketing automation platforms. What you're seeing right now is a screenshot of Act-On's funnel reports. So funnel reports are powerful because they give you a marketing to sales real-time view of your funnel. Traditionally, marketing data is very siloed and lives in the different platforms that you're using to reach your audience. But with these funnel reports, you're able to consolidate your data into a real-time view that shows the velocity of how your leads are progressing over time. You're seeing the number of anonymous visitors you've generated, and then how many of those have converted into new leads. And then from those, how many new opportunities you have and how many you're winning. So this gives you immediate insight into the true effectiveness of your marketing efforts and shows a comprehensive understanding of your lead to revenue conversions. And if you can provide this to your executive team, then they're going to understand what you're doing, and they're going to be able to appreciate the efforts a lot more, because this makes sense. They can start to see exactly where issues are, where things are getting stuck in the funnel, where to focus on next. So we've talked about nurturing, we've talked about marketing. Let's talk about tactics to help close the deal. What can marketing do to provide those insights over to the sales team to make sure that they have the information and the insights they need to close the deal? So the first thing is making sure that the information that marketing has about a lead, and both the demographic and that behavioral information we talked about, making sure that that is available to your sales organization. You're constantly learning more and more about who you're talking to, what's important to them, what are their main challenges and interests, just by what they're interacting with on your site. So making sure that the sales team has access to that information is critical. Basically, providing this information is going to save your sales team time, and it's going to allow them to tailor their conversations. And an example of this is, for example, if somebody was on Act-On's website and they were talking through, if they were downloading information on the lead scoring white paper, and then they went to lead prioritization webinar, we would understand that lead scoring and prioritization was a key challenge for them. And when the sales rep reached out to call them, they would know where to start the conversation. They're not going to talk about necessarily, they may, that's where they would start their conversation. This looks to be a challenge of yours. Let's dive right into your, what you're doing today around lead scoring and prioritization and how we can help better that. So the other thing, like I said, it's really going to help accelerate your pipeline, because sales team, your sales reps can get real-time notifications. They can know when those prospects that they're speaking with are on the site, and maybe it's a key page. We talked about pricing page. Maybe, it's great for a sales rep to know that after they get off a demo, that prospect hits the pricing page, because they're interested in, it's moving them along their buying process, and you're starting to see, again, that digital body language of what's important to them, what are they doing next. So for the reps to see those notifications is key. And then making sure that they have access to when customers are more likely for a conversation, existing customer base. What are they doing? What's their activity on the site? How are they interacting, engaging with your brand? And when are they ready to upsell and to move forward? So what this boils down to is making sure you know your pipeline and you have insights into where they are. Making sure that you're utilizing all that intelligence that's gathered within your marketing automation platform, and make sure that it doesn't end with marketing, that information is shared across the board with sales, that they can understand where everybody is, where their prospects are. And then two other key things on this. One is, as a marketer, it's a challenge when you're creating leads and they get called, but they're not ready, and then they just go into a black hole, because the effort it took and the dollars it took to generate that lead, you want to make sure that it's not just, that it doesn't go into that black hole. 80% of leads that are deemed bad leads by sales go on to buy within 24 months. Now, the key here is that it's a bad lead right now, but that doesn't mean that the company is not, they're just too early. Maybe they have another project that they're working on. They're not ready to make this commitment right now. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a place for those to go, that you have a closed loop. So instead of saying bad lead, move on, it's, sales, give it back, return it to marketing and say, go nurture it for longer. Watch, do a different nurture track, watch for different buy signals, and catch that company when they are ready to buy, or when this comes up again for them. Because what happens is, if you're not doing that, your competitors are, and that lead that you identified and that you started to work with, when they are ready to buy, if you're not staying in front of them, you're not going to be top of mind, and you may have just given that deal to your competitor. And the other thing is making sure you're looking for patterns and understanding what they mean. We've got a lot of data at our disposal now, and we want to make sure that we're understanding who to focus on, what those patterns are meaning. If people visit this page, are they more likely to buy? And making sure then that we're scoring that page appropriately, so then everybody who hits that web page or takes a certain action, if you've understood that within your sales cycle, if they do that one action, they have a greater likelihood of closing. Well, make sure that you're scoring that action higher, so it's being prioritized and the sales team knows this is where to spend my attention. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Anand.
All right, thanks, Janelle. So we're going to close out with kind of how do we send great emails, right? So I think Janelle walked you through a lot of really good information and insight into how to nurture and how to use kind of actions that people take to, with your brand in a way to send better communications. We're going to kind of take it back to that first communication, and some of the templates that we share here are probably going to be useful even for some of the subsequent ones, but we're really going to focus on that first communication. So how do you send a great first email? It's really all comes down to personalization. So if we can get you to do less data janitor work and get you to spend, more time on kind of customizing and personalizing outreach, the results will be good. And so what does personalization mean? It means you're sending an email that gains a prospect's attention, that builds your credibility, that's thoughtfully crafted, that's what's in it for me focused, and that shows that you want their attention over time, right? So it's not just a one and done type of email. Because this isn't a transactional sale, it is going to require kind of keeping you top of mind for them. This sounds time consuming, I know, and it does require a bit of extra time. Again, if we can get the prospecting more seamless, you can spend all that time you're saving on the low value work on this part, which is where you're going to actually make meaningful gains in your conversion. So um, you can make this scalable. So even though it is a bit more work, it is scalable. So it's not one-off kind of sort of artistic emails you have to send every time. You're going to have more time because of prospecting efficiency. You're going to get more meetings. You're going to close more business. So it's the harder you work, the luckier you get. Mail merge will be your friend. So some of you may already be using tools for this. You'll be able to continue using it with sort of the strategy we're going to outline here. So personalization doesn't mean inefficient. You're going to develop templates that work for you, and then you're going to do what we think of as mass personalized outreach. So it is going to look like every prospect is getting a custom email, but it will be kind of mass personalized. So the building blocks of a good template, we kind of covered this before. Subject lines are incredibly important. You want to highlight an understanding of the prospect's goals in business, and you want to get to a level that's a little bit more than sort of superficial, right? So I get a lot of emails saying like, hey, it looks like you're trying to grow revenue, right? Like show me any business that is not trying to grow revenue, right? It's a completely sort of useless kind of filler text in copy. So you want to be specific, and I'll show you kind of examples of emails that were specific that were really good. You want to make the prospects smarter. You want to, if you can, make them smarter and give them time back in their day. So if it's something that they were maybe thinking about that you educated them on, that's really valuable. And then the final thing is gimmicks. I think there's a lot of like gimmicks out there about emails. There's the what's the recent one I've seen? Had you fall under a rock? Like that's an email that gimmick that sort of get some mileage, but ultimately those things kind of run their course, animated GIFs and emails. Like, again, they can work for a bit, but over the long term, you really have to sort of have a conversation with folks. So the what's in it for me starts with the subject line. These were the terrible subject lines that we got, right? Congrats, right? So this was pretty much, I knew right off the bat this person read about our financing event and was just saying congrats. Again, not like I just don't need people saying congratulations to me after we raise a financing round. It's just not something that's important. Checking in. So this is one of those like growth hack type things people do where I think they're trying to imply that we've had a previous conversation. Again, you're selling something high value. These types of tactics sometimes maybe work, but they kind of do leave a bad taste. Vague questions were another popular thing. Like, what do you think about YouTube monetization for your business, or some sort of vague question. Again, idea maybe behind this, and I trying to get in the head of a terrible emailer, so it's hard for me to do this. But how do you, hey, I'm going to create this curiosity gap, and you're going to be so interested in reading my email, you're going to open it up. And then the final one was superlatives, and superlatives are often mixed with like, what do Adobe and Google use for cloud hosting? So this is like superlatives that are, with a combination of Google and Adobe are like a terrible thing to send to a startup, right? Like we at CB Insights have very little in common with Google or Adobe, and so what they're using, kind of when I read that, it just tells me that the B2B salesperson on the other end is sort of tone deaf. So these were, kind of popular, and this isn't obviously all of the subject lines. These were the ones that got opened, right? These are the emails that got responses that got opened, right? So first two, you'll see it kind of have a similar theme. The first one was your 55th screw up as a startup CEO. So this was a post that I'd written called 54 Screw Ups of a Startup CEO. This person kind of riffed on that, added my 55th, which was nice to know that I continue to screw up. But it was a good email. It kind of got me to open it. The other one was Content Marketing Power Law. It referenced an analysis that we had done, and I'll show you that email actually. The third one, CB Insights research, you can generate more leads. So earlier I talked about how do you show an understanding of the business, right? So this person could have said, CB Insights, it will generate more revenue for you, but that's, again, like every company wants to do that. This person got to a level of understanding that made me want to open that email and reach out, right? And the insight they had gleaned was that we use our content and our research as a way to generate leads. So this was, somebody who'd done a little bit of homework, and so that was clear. The fourth one, somebody wrote your Series A investors. Again, probably a good curiosity gap title. We hadn't raised the Series A, so I was like, hey, what is this? Who's this? What's this person up to? So I opened it. There were actually some recommendations for investors in there. I thought that was valuable. The fifth one was former Dow Jones VentureSource user, so we compete with this product from Dow Jones. So immediately that kind of got me to pay attention, got me to open it up. And then in the email, the person actually delivered some product insight. So it's not just about getting them to open it. It's a big part of it, but then you got to actually deliver. And so this is one of those emails. This was the one content marketing power law. You can read it on your own, and we'll send this over to you. But what this person did, they spent some time, right? They read this post, they found a quote from it. They then kind of said, hey, have you thought about this? And then tied it back to their organization. So the subject line showed that they did their homework. The understanding of our business was clear from the content. It was very specific, and taking a conversation with them had the potential to make me smarter and save me time, and that's really valuable. The result of this one email was that we were actually very, very far along in picking a vendor in this category. So it was a pain point that we had, and we were actually close to making a selection. This email was so good that we held off making that decision and took a demo with this firm. And so that was a 30K opportunity that they got in the mix for because of one email, right? So that's the power of an email, right? We were really far along. I saw this, I sent it to the team, and I was like, this is an awesome email. Like, we owe this guy a demo at least. Like, it was literally like that was kind of the sentiment on their product and on them, and they engendered that goodwill after just a really good email. So you got your subject line down, your email copy needs to be good too, right? So again, the first email, or the terrible email started with things like, congrats on your new funding. It seems like you're growing, right? Like, again, these are just such stupid openings. It's like mind boggling, right? Like, it seems like you're growing. Yeah, like, again, of course. Um, uh, so the only one thing I'd recommend, there's a book called Ogilvy on Advertising. His whole sort of mantra is advertising is salesmanship. I would really recommend this book if you want to get good at copywriting. It has sort of really concise, easily written chapters. If you don't want to buy it, just write like a human is probably the best thing I would take away from this. Don't use jargon and try to use big words that sound smart. People like to be talked to like people. So let's get the mail merge ready, right? So this is what you're going to do. You can use Acton. That's a screenshot from Acton software. But really what you want is in an Excel or CSV, depending on your mail merge software, you want these 7 fields: the first name of the person, the company name, pick a blog post or article title that references them or that they wrote, a little article summary, pick out some nugget from the article you found interesting, maybe drop in a competitor name. You can use some of those tools or strategies I showed you earlier, and then where you can help. And so what this will look like is, this kind of template. And I'm reticent in sharing templates because people kind of blindly use them. So you take this and make it your own. This is not the perfect template, but this gives you kind of at least a guideline, right? So it's like, hi Joe, or hi Anand, I read your post about your content marketing power law. On the topic of X in particular, I thought your view on, whatever it might be was really contrarian or interesting. We've worked with folks like your competitor on and we can help here. Do you have a few minutes to see how we can help, right? So this is and you can create that Excel spreadsheet for a bunch of companies, drop in your mail merge, and then you're off to the races. So, I think don't be scared away by the work, but I think you can make this scalable using a template like this. So with that, I'm going to kind of open it up to Q&A. Again, ask on Twitter or ask via the questions feature here on the webinar software. You can also tweet at Acton or at CB Insights. There is also, Janelle and my information is on the next page. So if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out. But yeah, let's see if there's any questions. we'll start with a couple that I've seen, and then I think there's a few that are probably more in Janelle's territory, so we'll throw some over to her as well. So one of the questions that came in was, can you use these same tools and strategies for selling to more established companies also? Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think and it sort of dovetails, I guess, with the next question that's come in, which is how is the funnel different for a startup versus typical B2B enterprise? So I think the strategies can be employed across all types of companies. And the funnel is probably similar. I think the funnel just probably has more sort of intermediate steps. When you sell into a larger organization, there's more consensus that you need to build. You're probably going to need not necessarily be talking to the decision maker right from the get-go. So, but the process is similar. You want to nurture those leads. You want to build up your credibility over time. We sell into emerging companies that are trying to sell into B2B sales teams, as well as like big corporations. Nurturing and keeping top of mind is really important for all of them. So not all that different. Just I think the time and some of the intermediate steps will be. So one other question that just came in: what types of life events or news are good triggers to reach out to a startup? So there's no one life event. And so we think of a life event as like, are they hiring a CFO? They opened up a new office. I don't think there's one life event that's good for everybody, right? If you are selling into a development team and you see hiring of engineers of a certain type, that might be a trigger for you. If you are selling into a payroll service and you notice a lot of headcount growth, that might be useful for you. If you want to plug into Salesforce and you notice somebody's using Salesforce as their CRM, that might be a signal for you. So the signals will vary based on the type of product that you offer. So let me turn it over. There's a question that just came in for Janelle. So Janelle, is there an ideal amount for the number of emails served in a nurture program? Hey, Janelle, are you there? All right, I think we might have lost Janelle. All right, so we'll try to maybe get some of these answers for the questions on the nurture stuff from Janelle and send those out. Other questions that kind of came in: how do you figure out when a good time is to try to re-engage with a startup that previously was rejected you or was too early? Again, I think automated reminders, indications that you're tracking their business, right? So if we can get you an alert that they closed a new funding round, that they are making big moves in the hiring front, that they won an award, right? These are things to reach out to people. Not every single communication has to be a sales communication in the sense of, hey, can I get a demo? It could just be like, hey, we're tracking you. Here's something that we learned, right? I think, again, making them smarter, giving them time back in their day is really important. Other question: how do you figure out if a startup has budget? So, again, right after a funding announcement, there is a lot of latent demand that's sitting there in a startup. They probably held back purchasing decisions until that funding round closed. So there's definitely budget then. The challenge again there is that everybody's pitching them. So, how do you find them earlier? In terms of, how do you figure out if a startup has budget for certain types of capabilities, right? For instance, I'll take CB Insights as an example. 2 years ago, we didn't have Salesforce, and we didn't need it, right? We had a biz dev organization of 3 people. Now we're, nearing 20 people. So if you looked at our hiring over time, you'd have realized like we do need a CRM, right? So you could look at our hiring and figure out that, hey, they're probably going to need a tool here and they're going to need to carve out budget. We started hiring a marketing team. So if you knew that we were hiring in that area, you could say, hey, marketing automation might be necessary. So there's, I think, other sort of signals that you can use to figure out if a startup has budget pre-funding. If they're growing their headcount aggressively, that probably means they're going to need real estate. They might be moving. They might need some spillover space. So again, it depends on your business which signals are most interesting to you. Are LinkedIn shared connections credible for reach out? So I'm assuming you're talking about sort of their introductions via LinkedIn. Um, I guess people's mileage may vary. I personally find LinkedIn's InMail is a hot mess, uh, and so I don't know if I find it particularly valuable. I don't know if I don't think we've bought anything as a result of being a LinkedIn shared connection, right? If somebody's going to recommend, if I know somebody well and they're going to recommend a vendor to me, they're going to have my email. I'm not going to be relying on an in-mail to come through. So I know we're over time. If there are any other questions, feel free to queue them up on Twitter and the questions. We'll try to send out, some answers, either maybe record it as a podcast or send it out via email as text. But again, if you have questions, feel free to ping us on Twitter or questions. You have my email as well. Hopefully this was useful. If you guys start making really big sales, please let us know as a result of this. We'd love to track your success and hear about some war stories and some things that went well. So again, thanks for the time. We'll shoot out the transcript and the presentation afterwards as well. Thanks. Take care. Bye.